ago, I looked on the website and looked up the TSA program to see if they had one on Tabletop, and sure enough, they did. But I found out they needed 90 days lead time on it, and I was inside of that, so that's why I'm here. Basically, I decided to throw something together. I started shooting tabletops when I first joined this club, because I joined in September, when the club meeting started, and it was so good 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago. And having just started shooting stereo, I didn't have anything for the assignments. And they had assignments like waterfalls, various other things that you just couldn't shoot in the wintertime. And so I started throwing things together on tabletops and competed that way. So a lot of what you're going to see in just a little while, you're going to see the slides. That was the main thing that I wanted to do, is bring the slides in. Those are going to be some pretty old ones with a few newer ones thrown in, okay, just to make a point here and there. What I want to do is give you a lot of different ideas. I'll show you my mistakes as well as my winners, and hopefully you'll just get some idea on what you can do yourself to throw together some tabletops for the tabletop competition that will be coming up in a couple of months. The preferred camera, is that going to goof you up when I talk away from that, Steve? I don't have to do this, do I?
No, that's okay.
The camera that is really the easiest to use is a 35 millimeter. Now, I know a lot of people in the club have got realist equipment, and you can use a realist for close-ups, but you have to get in the habit of narrowing the distance between the two lenses, and you'll have to do that by thinking about it. When you take your right image, you'll have to work on a slide bar like I've got here for the 35, and alternately cap the right and the left lens, and then just cock the shutter to get your two exposures at a closer base than the realist normally allows, okay? I don't want to get into that too much. If you have questions on that, I can help you with it after the presentation. What I use is a slide bar, and the one that comes in the handiest for me is this Bogan unit. I've got marks on the back of it so I can see how far I move the camera. And once you figure out your stereo base, you just merely take your right image, move it over, take your left image, and you're all set. Now you have to obviously advance the film. You're taking two separate chips when you do that. You really need to have it on a sturdy tripod of some sort. It doesn't hurt to have a nice slide bar like this, but you don't really need that. A couple of the other things I've come up with, I just threw this together the other night just to show you that you can make one out of wood pretty simply. A couple pieces of wood, just tack a strip on the back. This is a little T-nut inside here. It's a 1/4-20 nut that goes into the wood. It seats itself pretty good. I had to countersink it a little bit so that I had the threads close enough to the bottom so I could put this on a tripod. Okay, so it doesn't have to be expensive. And then you can just take your camera, set it on here, and move it back and forth for your two left and right positions. I had another one that I made up out of aluminum, if you're into aluminum, so a lot of different ways of doing it. This doesn't have the piece on it. And Steve saw this board before and asked what it was for. And basically I told him that when I want to shoot with tow in, I put that on there, it automatically tows the camera in, okay? We'll talk about that in a minute too. The best lens really is somewhere in the 45 to 55 millimeter range, normal lens. I tend to shoot some wide angles, but you got to be real careful with that because you end up overshooting your background. So when I shoot with a wide angle for a setup like that, it'll be outside where I want to use the outside as the natural background. I also quite often shoot with a little bit longer lens. I'll shoot with a 90 millimeter or 100 millimeter flat field lens on a bellows, which allows me to take the macro shots. I'll try to point out in the slides which lens was used, but I like that lens a lot. You want to have a real sturdy table. Now we do have a folding table here. I don't tend to use folding tables at home. This one is relatively sturdy. I wouldn't recommend using a standard card table. They're a little bit shaky, and you're liable to end up dumping some of your equipment. Plus things can move around and goof up your arrangement too. I usually use the kitchen table. Well, I don't use the kitchen table anymore, but I use a dining room table, or I've got a room upstairs where I've got a spare dining room table that I bought a little while back. It's a nice big table. It's real heavy, and I do the setups on that. the lighting, I wanted to show some things here. This isn't what I use. I don't use all of this, obviously. It's just to show you some different ideas. It can be as simple as a few boards nailed together like you've seen here. I just bought a 2x2 and a piece of 1x2, tacked it together with a few nails to give me an upright stand, so you don't have to spend a lot of money. And then this 1x2 is held on with just a little bungee, which holds it pretty good. So you can move things up and down that way. On this side, I've got an old light stand that also works pretty well. So if you have the equipment, light stands and that sort of thing, great, use them. But if you don't, I don't want anybody to have any excuse for not shooting tabletops because you don't have light stands, okay? You can put something together with pieces of wood, or you can use extra tripods, or any kind of a stand that you have sitting around the house. The lights themselves, you can go anywhere from natural light. I've done some where I set up right in front of a window, so the light is actually behind the subject, and then use reflectors to bounce things around. And reflectors can be anything from just a piece of white card like this, to maybe foil-covered cards, whatever helps you get that light on the subject. Now the reflectors are going to have to be positioned and held in place, not by hand, but by something else. You'll have to stick them in place somehow so that they stay in the same location and give you the same light from your left and your right image. You don't want the lighting to change between the images. Another one that comes in handy is a photo flood. This is a blue light. Available at the camera stores or through the mail. And this one helps a little bit over your normal incandescent lighting in that it has that blue coloration so it doesn't come out as yellow as the indoor lighting. I've also used regular indoor lights. Sometimes you want a little warmer rendition, and that'll do it. This is just a simple spotlight. Bought at the hardware store. These clamp-on lights are handy, but these that I've got here are kind of cheap. You can see the tape on them. I usually have to tape them in place to kind of hold them there while I'm using them because they're really chintzy. So if you do buy the clamp-ons, look for something that's relatively substantial where that adjustment is made so that the whole thing's in place for you. This is a little clamp-on reading light with a small high-intensity lamp in it, and these work quite well. Now with this light and with this one, you're going to be dealing with the warmer temperature. So you either want to use maybe a blue filter on the lens, or use a type B film that's balanced for tungsten, unless you want the warm rendition. I wanted to show also this little guy. This is a screw-in flash. It's an AC flash unit. I don't know if any of you have seen those or not. I'm sure some have. It has a sensor on it that allows you to use it as a slave flash. So you can set these up in several different locations and hook one of them to the camera using a PC cord. This is the cord that came with it. It's pretty long. It's probably 10 or 12 feet long, so you can get the light pretty far away from the camera if you need to do that. And one end plugs into the light, the other one into the PC socket on the camera. So we're talking about the older cameras here, the ones that still have PC sockets. These aren't real expensive. I think I paid about $20 a piece for them. They're still available as far as I know. The last time I looked, B&H still had them, and they were still right around the $20 range. They work out pretty good. As far as backgrounds go, when you do a tabletop or a close-up, you pretty much want to eliminate the background. You don't want anything to be there at all. So I tend to use maybe a piece of cloth. This material is pretty bright, but it also doesn't reflect the light real well. It doesn't have a real sheen to it. So it gives you a nice flat color in the background, okay? The same with this black piece, used the same way. It tends not to have reflections on it. You can tighten it up just a little bit. I got a couple wrinkles in it here. And then you just end up with this nice plain black background. Your subject and all that would go in front of that. And different types of cards would work, colored poster board, those sort of things. And the other one that I like to use is a little rear projection screen that I kind of threw together a few years ago. This one's getting a little weathered or a little worn, but it's frosted on one side and just plain on the other side, nice and shiny on the other side. So what I've done with this is just put a projector behind it and project a scene or a sky or whatever I want on this, and then do the setup in front of it, and then that becomes your background. Now when you do that, you have to allow enough depth of focus to keep this part of it in focus as well. When you use just plain backgrounds, you don't care. You really want those to go a little bit soft so they aren't in focus. Pretty much it for the slides. The subjects are up to you. I don't think anybody can say they don't have anything in their house. You've all got things you can photograph. And by turning your imagination on to photograph the things that you collect, the things that you like, or just the normal things that you have in the house itself. I've seen some real nice things done just with food, apples, oranges, those sort of things, and with different utensils, glassware, flower arrangements, all those sort of things are available to everybody. I want to talk a little bit about the stereo base. There's a lot of argument, conjecture, and whatever going on about how to determine how far do you move this camera in between exposures. I've read most of that stuff. I've worked out my own formulas. I've used other people's formulas. And I've come to the conclusion that that doesn't work for me. I spend too much time looking at formulas and figuring things out. So I guess after a while you get a little feel for it too. Also your taste changes as far as how much depth you want. And what you really need to be able to do is understand what that base is all about. And what it's all about is giving you a narrow angle of view. And I tend to think of that angle. You don't want to go beyond 5 degrees. So you're thinking of a fairly narrow angle there, and 3 degrees is probably better. I'm going to throw a few little general rules at you here. The other general rule that still works is the 1 in 30 rule. So you measure the distance to your subject, the near point on the subject, and that's most easily done with a nice stiff tape measure that you can just kind of, work from the camera and decide how far away it is like that without having to have 2 hands, have somebody hold the other end of it for you. You take that distance, divide it by 30, and the result is the distance that you should move your camera in inches. Okay? That's the simplest starting point that there is, the 1 in 30 rule. I sometimes use what I call a variation on that. It's 1 over the focal length of the lens. So if you're using a different focal length lens, like a 50 millimeter, you want 1 in 50. You want to divide the distance to that near point on the subject by 50. And just try these different things and see which one works for you. And I'll tell you how to beat it all, even if it doesn't work, okay? You determine what you think should be that minimum or distance to move the camera. And start out, it doesn't matter which way you go, but we'll say start with the left image. So you're going to start over here. You're going to shoot that left image. You're going to move your camera over sideways. The distance that you've determined should be that base separation. Let's say it's 1 inch, okay? You decide it's going to be 1 inch. So your first exposure would be here for the left image. You'd move over 1 inch. You'd take your right image, and you'd move over half of that base, again to the right, and take another image. So now you've got a left and a middle that are 1 inch apart. You've got a middle and a right that are a ½ inch apart. The combinations you can work with now have just bracketed that calculation that you made. You said 1 inch is what you want, but you have a pair on the right and the middle that give you a ½ inch of separation. You have a pair on the left and the middle that give you 1 inch of separation. And you can pair up the left and the extreme right and get 1.5 inches. So you got it bracketed. And that's basically how I do it now. I'll always shoot 3. Okay? Any questions so far?
Dennis?
Yes.
On the rear projection screen, do you put the shiny side to the back or to the front?
The frosted side goes toward the projector.
Okay, do you get any reflection off the front?
From here.
Then you won't use any lights in
Yeah, you just got to look at things and see what you got going. You will get, you definitely will get light coming through here onto the subject. Definitely will. And then by using, your light bar, this can be placed anywhere. I've got one on each side like that. That can be placed right across here. It can be placed on an angle, wherever you have to hook your lights, up, down, wherever they happen to be. And you can end up shooting your lights so that you're getting light on the subject, but you can put little, piece of cardboard or whatever to keep it from shining on the background itself. Okay, make sense? Anything else? Okay, Steve, can you give me a hand for a minute and just show this out of the way?
Projection of a picture onto that glass. Don't you have to watch the lens of the projector is not shining on it? Would you have to have it lowered for good angle?
I haven't really run into that. You'll get a hot spot if that's what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can get a hot spot with it.
One picture that was done, they used the hot spot
Mhm.
as the setting sun
Yeah.
in the picture.
Yeah, I haven't had that problem though. I'll show you a couple that I did. I did one with the sky and one with, I did one with the sun in it, you know, so it didn't turn out to be a problem. But I couldn't really see any really light, bright hot spot. I didn't have any trouble with it at all. So just experiment. Uh-oh.
I just love that TVC startup
Bessie
song.
here.
Yeah, they all kind of do that, unless you lube them.
Anyone know how to oil one of those things?
They're kind of hard to oil. We can talk about that offline.
It says in the thing, oil it every so often.
Some of these I haven't seen in about 20 years either. This is one of my first 3D pictures done for the club. Somebody had the bright idea that the assignment should be doorknobs. So here we go. Just a doorknob sitting on a mirror and then placing a red background where the mirror would pick up the reflection of that background. Same assignment, doorknobs. Some of these things are pretty simple when I look at them now. This is just stuff we had laying around the house. Like I said, had to make the assignment. I can't bear to miss an assignment, so I'll usually come up with something.
What did you make the jets of fuel out of?
I'm sorry?
What did you make the fuel jets out of?
Oh, that was kind of tricky. That was fluorescent paint. I did 2 exposures. I did one out of focus with nothing but that paint being lit.
Wow.
And then did the second exposure with the doorknob and everything else in focus. Another kind of a dumb one. I don't remember what the assignment was on this thing, but
Humor.
yeah, I guess so. Go ahead, Jerry. You're seeing all my early, some really crude work actually. This does a simple slinky, one light, floodlight, and red background. This one has done pretty well. I guess the people that judge it sometimes thinks it's kind of arty or something. Believe that it was supposed to be emphasizing a single color, and I just took 3 of those, I don't know what they are really, they're embroidery hoops. Okay, my wife just whispered in my ear. I knew they were for sewing, but I had no idea what they were used for. And I took a little cube of plexiglass and painted it red, put it on a white piece of cardboard, and you take this poster board and you set it directly underneath where you're going to have your set, and you just curl it gently in a nice arc up behind it, and you get just this plain white field that you can photograph on. The orange and drop. That's a glass drop. It's fairly obvious because it's kind of big. If I ever do that again, I'll try to make a drop that's a little closer to real water drop size. The orange was impaled on a wooden dowel, and the dowel stuck back through the background into a support mechanism back there, a piece of wood or something. And then we just used a piece of poster board, a piece of real dark blue, fairly flat poster board. By flat, I mean non-reflective. I always look for non-reflective materials for the backgrounds. This was done using that piece of screen that I had up there just a minute ago, the 1/4-inch plexiglass that's frosted on one side. I used the shiny side and set the 3 glasses on that, and then used a piece of light fixture lens, I guess you'd call it, like the lenses in this ceiling right here. Use that in the background. That red piece of cloth that you just saw, a piece of coat hanger wire, and a bunch of flowers taped onto it. I really used to do really deep stuff when I first started shooting. I think a lot of 3D people start out that way. We tend to really overdo the 3D depth. I'm getting away from that now. That's why I said the base stuff changes too, because as you get away from that, you start using little narrower bases as well. This is an example of a background not to use. And I think it's readily apparent why. If I keep my eyes around the edges, I can kind of get those red stripes lined up. But boy, I got a lot of difficulty right directly behind that, that flower vase and up to the right where the folds are. So I thought maybe it would work, but it sure didn't. This is a setup that was done outside. We call this stuff tabletops and still lifes, but they don't really have to all be done inside. This was done outside in the field. I just took an extra tripod and sort of stabilized this flower a little bit so it wouldn't blow around in the wind. And then I used my slide bar setup to take the 2 exposures of it. Now the background went black on this because I was shooting outside with a 100mm flat field lens and a bellows, so I had a lot of extension, and then I used flash to light the subject. Inside a tulip, you don't need a background at all. 100mm flat field lens again. This was done at one of the local greenhouses, Bourdines. It was a rainy day, didn't have anything else to do, and I was so nuts about photography I had to just go photograph. So we went to Bourdines. They weren't real busy. I asked if I could set my tripod up and shoot some photos, and was able to do so. Got quite a few that day. Question, I'm sorry.
What do you use for mounts for these? These are 35mm full frame?
They start out full frame, but I shoot them. If I know I'm going to mask them down to the realist masks, I just make sure that I take that into account when I shoot the photograph. So these are all mounted in the realist masks. This is a standard realist mask here. This is kind of a silly thing I put together with some of my kids' toys. The assignment was Halloween, and that's a rear projected moon on the background, purposely thrown out of focus. That's it. Now, Bill, you asked about the hot spot, and I can definitely see a lot more light right in the center of that background projection. That would be the hot spot that we're talking about. This was done the same way, rear projected sun, some of the kids' toys, and incandescent lighting. And Steve, this answers your question about the lighting. The light from the rear projection shows through on the background, and the foreground is all lit with a single flood. This is obviously warm. I kind of wanted it that way anyway because it matches the sun in the background. The only complaint I've got about it is that I didn't get the foreground in focus, but the attention really isn't drawn there anyway. The checkerboard pattern was a hand-drawn perspective drawing on a piece of cardboard to exaggerate the feeling of perspective and depth. A little different just to show that you can change the lighting and make it balance out a little closer to white. Still way too much depth here. I'm criticizing myself here, and you know, I wouldn't shoot one like this today. I'd shoot it with a lot less depth than that. Tended to really get as much as I could in the photographs when I started out. The star field was done. Can you put that one back in there?
Sure. Just a second.
I did the background in several stages. I actually moved it, so I got like 2 or 3 exposures there. I think I only see 2 levels. And I did a double exposure. Everything else stays still, so it doesn't hurt anything. So you can do half your exposure, the calculated exposure for the foreground, with that star field in one position, and then move the background back a little bit and shoot the second half of the exposure. That's how I did it. So they're just basically holes in a blue card, real dark blue card, letting the light shine through. This is a pretty classic example of a tabletop. The rear projected sun, the water is crinkled aluminum foil. The boat in the distance is just made out of black construction paper and white typing paper. The push pins for the ropes in the foreground, and some little pieces of stick I had laying around for the dock. and then another silhouette for the boat on the right. Shell and sky. That sky is rear projected on a screen that's tipped a little bit so that it's a little closer at the top to help make it look a little bit like 3D. All done indoors. The base, sand or whatever, is kitty litter, and then a bunch of little shells stuck in there with the larger shell just standing up. See, I didn't know about the stereo window there. Actually, I think I did that on purpose, but the background is rear projected. Just a fireworks design that I rear projected behind a little table with my son's toy motorcycle on it. This was an experiment with mirrors. It didn't come off real good, but I kind of got the idea down. The subject is on the left and the reflection is on the right. The mirror was placed in front of the red background, and then a blue background was placed 90 degrees over to the left so that that background will become blue. I'm not real sure what I wanted to do there, but I wanted the background to look like it split into two different scenes, and it kind of does. Again, just things you can try. You know, I plan on improving on some of these ideas. Just reviewing them helps me a little bit. They're not all great, but you know, a lot of different ideas. This was another mirror experiment that kind of went bad. I wondered if you could do something like a kaleidoscope, you know, to get the images in 3D. And I think the idea was good, but what I'm seeing here is too much interference from the fact that these were front surface mirrors. If you have access, or I'm sorry, rear surface mirrors. If you have access to a front surface mirror, this would be a pretty good size pair of mirrors here, you might want to try something like this. I'm getting too many secondary image reflections by the fact that these are just standard mirrors. There's two mirrors there and one flower. This worked a little bit better. This is just an apple and one of those rings sitting on a mirror, done outside and shot down on it so that we get the clear blue sky as the background.
It's very convincing 3D. It actually looks like an object in the free space between the mirror and the screen.
Yeah. This one I think has worked about the best of my little mirror tricks. And this was done the same way, same day actually. This is a little toy just kind of balanced on one foot and the one arm that's in the back there that you can't see. It's balanced right on the mirror. You're looking almost straight down on it, and the blue is the blue sky in the background. And one thing I can tell you to try if you try some of this mirror stuff is to put a polarizer on the lens. And I just about eliminated that secondary reflection from the glass surface by using the polarizer. It cut out that reflection without removing the actual mirror reflection. That tended to work out pretty good. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah, by the way they're mounted. By pushing them together a little bit. The question was, how did I get it to come out of the window itself? And that's done when you mount the chips. These particular images you've seen on the mirrors, you can do that with them because there's nothing around the edges. So I shot way more stereo depth than you normally would, and I put most of it in front of the window so that it wouldn't be too disturbing. But you get it to come out of the window by putting the two chips closer together relative to each other. No. The question was, can you adjust that when you shoot it by having a narrower base? And the answer is no. Can you put that one up again, Derek?
Which one?
Yeah, the last one.
Okay, hang on.
Those two guys. Okay, the actual depth here, from front to back, is achieved, the stereo depth is achieved by the base, the separation of the cameras, the amount of separation. If you want more depth front to back, you separate the cameras a little bit more when you do your actual photograph. Bringing it out of the screen is done by how the chips are mounted after they're already developed. And you bring it forward of the screen by just taking the left and the right image and moving them closer together in relation to one another, so toward the center of the mount. Okay? This was done in my basement with, I think, 3 or 4 bags of silica sand. I needed something for patterns. It was another assignment in the club. And I made a little box that I put on top of 2 sawhorses and then poured this sand out and then just took my hands and started making patterns in it until I saw something I liked. And when I saw something I liked, I lit it with 2 of those little floods that I showed you just a few minutes ago. And that's what gave it the warm tone. And I shot my sample exposures of it, just doing the cha-cha method. Didn't even use the slide bar, I just did right image, moved over to the left a little bit, did left image, and this is what came out. And I also shot a couple with a blue filter to make the sand white like it really was, and I didn't like that as well, so this is the one I used. Sometimes the incandescent light can work in your favor. It's another one on that same sand table. Just did the first one and then smeared everything out, made another design and photographed that. The art people call this high key. Basically, it's overexposed, but I did it on purpose. I was trying to achieve an effect. I don't like the background. I like the effect, and I'll try some more of it. These are lucite cubes that I cut out of some scrap plastic at work, and then I just kind of sanded the outside of them so that they wouldn't be shiny, and put it on a the grid is one of these pieces of grid out of a lighting fixture like you see over your head. It's got 1/4-inch holes in it, so those are just, or 1/2-inch holes, I'm sorry. And those are 1/2-inch holes. And then I lit from the bottom on those 2 cubes with those 2 little spots I showed you. So we just took the spotlights underneath and then lit from up above with a single flood. So there's, again, all I want you to do is see some ideas, start working your own juices, and think about the things you've got at home and the different lighting things you can possibly do. If I were to change this one, I think I'd do something different with the background. It doesn't help it at all. Something else needs to be done back there. This was a setup in my home. I've got a brick chimney right in the dining room. I live in an old farmhouse, and I sometimes use that for a background. So I just set a little tiny table up in front of that brick chimney and set everything up. And the candle is not the light source, even though it looks like it is. A single bulb in one of those reflectors. You can tell by the shadow of the candle where that light was placed. It was to the left and up kind of behind us just a little bit. This is a close-up of lasagna noodles. We had a competition, I think it was What Is It or something like that, and I drive myself crazy to figure out what am I going to shoot, And well, that's a pretty neat little pattern if you just stand all these noodles on end, and shoot them this way. So this is done with a macro lens, and it's done with a flood, one of those photo floods that I had up in the front. Pardon me? Heck, the macaroni ones. Question?
I was just going to say, was the flood at a fairly low angle so that the light's shown through many layers of lasagna?
It glowed pretty nice.
It reminds me of Price Canyon when
Yeah.
it's low, how it's really orange because the light goes through all
It
those
just
layers.
reflected that way. I didn't get it real low, but it did kind of get down in between them and light them up kind of nice. This is a little fungus called bird nest fungus. This was shot out on the trail hiking, but it's still a still life or a setup. It was on wood chips. That's a single wood chip you see. Those cups are 1/4 inch across, really tiny, and I just took the chip and stuck it in the ground so it was upright, and shot it with flash, and also carry a little roll of backgrounds with me. I may have used the black piece of paper behind this to help eliminate any backgrounding. Same situation out in the field. These are little pixie cup lichen, and they're pretty tiny as well. This is a one-to-one reproduction, so the on-film size of these little pixie cups is the same as life size. So you can see that they aren't very big. They're, well, the dimension across this piece of film is only about 3/4 of an inch. So
I take it your flash is not connected to your camera.
no. This we talked about that earlier. We do not keep the flash on the camera for these shots. Did I miss that? I don't know if I said it or not. Okay, your flash has to be mounted separately. I said put it on a tripod or something separate. Find another way of supporting the flash so that it's not on the camera. If you keep your flash on the camera and you move it between the left and the right views, you also move the position of the light. And you don't want to do that in relation to the subject. The flash must stay stationary in relation to the subject itself, so you have to get it off the camera. Good point, Dennis. And this was also done the same way. I was cutting up some wood from a felled tree in the backyard, and one of them had these really neat little fungi on it. And you can tell the size based on the size of the ladybug. You all know about what size a ladybug is. And I took that piece of wood and took it out over to the barn and set it up on a workbench, and then proceeded to take my still life or my tabletop, even though it was outside, and it was lit with one of those floods, so it's a little warm, but I guess I don't mind that. Done indoors, again with the incandescent lights. It goes a little warm, but I don't think it really hurts this one either. I'm not as sensitive to warm coloration in a slide, I think, as some people might be. So I'm not as fussy about it. You might be a little fussier, and if so, then just filter or use a little bluer light. This is done with a 90mm lens, and I think there were 2 lights here. I can't recall exactly. This is a tabletop. We won't be accepting these for our still life though, because there's a real live human being in that one. Just to show you what I put my wife through sometimes. We had an assignment called Through the Window, and I couldn't come up with any really good, so I took our canoe, braced it up on a couple pieces of firewood on top of the picnic table in the yard, and she says, "You want me to what?" And she was a good sport. She got up in there and posed for me while I got down real low and got a couple of shots of that canoe. It's a tabletop, but it's not a still life. But to stay on this outside vein for just a minute, I would consider this to be a still life. It's not a tabletop, but I think we did say still lifes for this competition. So if you were to set something like this up outside, I personally think that would qualify.
That is the last one.
Okay, and that's it. That's what I've got for now. Any questions, comments, or whatever?
Thank you, Dennis.
Okay,
That was great.
break time.
I got a question.
All right, go.
Question is this. Everything that's polarized. You ever tried Is there a rule?
Okay, the question is, when I take these close-ups, do I ever tip the camera in and kind of keep the stuff in the center? I started doing it that way quite a few years ago when I didn't know what the rules were, and I took a lot of flower photographs that way. They work great. As long as you don't have something out around the edges that's going to get keystone, a central subject, no problem. Works just great. If you have detail in the corners or along the edges, you really don't want to do that. Because what you end up doing is squashing one side on one photograph and squashing the other side on the opposite photograph. It's called keystone, and that's very difficult to adjust and mount. So you don't want to turn them in. Most of the time on the macro shots now, you have such a small base, you're not moving the camera very far, that you probably won't have to tow it in, because you're going to cut some off the edges anyway to be able to fit in the mounts that we use here for projection. Yeah.
on the candle, normally candles flicker. How did you?
I was very still. Made sure that we didn't have people walking by and that sort of thing.
Same with candle.
Like the one with the canoe, how'd you stay there, just like, you had to stay there like that?
I don't know.
She would have moved, if she would have moved one way or the other, that would have messed it up.
She was pretty good, and I'm pretty quick too. This slide bar that I showed you is real fast. You can take one, move over, bang, you got the other one. I can take 2 shots inside of a second without any problem at all. So she's used to it. And of course, blue canoe, red jacket, you know. Okay, thanks a lot. This was the inaugural of this particular program, and it will get better. I'll work on it, and maybe we'll see you again. See you next week.